Back to another edition of the Night Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie Schneiderite. The news finally broke. Andy Aurich is out as Rutgers tight end coach because he's accepted the Harvard head coaching job. If you listen to this podcast this week, we've kind of been alluding to that being the likely outcome of things. But Richie's going to update you on where things stand with the tight end coaching search. We're going to talk a little bit about, because there's a lot of threads that pop up on the boards about Syracuse, given, the historic rivalry, given that Fran Brown's now the head coach there. Richie's got some information that, all might not be, rosy up in northern New York. And we're also going to preview Wisconsin. We're going to talk Rutgers, Wisconsin, big home game tomorrow at noon. Rutgers looking to continue to climb from the hole it put itself in. Wisconsin's currently on a 3-game skid in the Big Ten. They're about to play their 4th game in 10 days, see if they can get things right. And we'll give our predictions there. But let's first talk tight end. Tight ends coach. Andy Aurich is out, like I said. What are you hearing about this opening? And do you see this as, a net positive for all parties involved?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a win-win scenario, like you just said, for both Rutgers and Aurich. Aurich gets to be the head coach of a program, gets to go back to the Ivies, a place where he's very familiar with during his time at Princeton, long tenure at Princeton. He also played at Princeton, obviously a Princeton alum, if with that scenario. So it all makes a lot of sense for him to make this move. Now, that being said, is it a jump up? I'm going to say no, personally. But it's also not a jump down either. It's like a weird spot. It's the Ivy League, so it's like a thing you can have for life if you're good at it. Look at the previous Harvard head coach. He was there for 30 years until he retired, and it was like, I'm done. So it made a lot of sense too, because the Princeton AD the Harvard AD is a former deputy AD at Princeton from Ulrich's time there with the Tigers. So she was very familiar with him, and obviously you're not going to convince Bob Surace to move over from Princeton to Harvard. So it made a lot of sense to just go with one of Bob's number 2, maybe 2A, 2B type guys, because I think Gleason was also a 2A guy there, but whatever, not the point. Yeah, so it's a win-win for everyone. Now, for Rutgers' perspective, I think it's a win because, number one, the tight ends have been pretty bad. I mean, there's no real secret there. They've been bad for a couple years. They haven't really used them. When they do use them, they're just not super productive. Like Johnny Langan, great player, great athlete, just not a tight end. It's a quarterback playing tight end. I think
he was basically a guy without a position. He was, the heart of the offense, but he made some big plays. But there really wasn't like a perfect cookie cutter spot for him in an offense.
No, because I mean, he was playing quarterback for 2 years, then he was like a running back quarterback for another year, and then he was like a tight end at one point / quarterback, and then finished off his career as a full-time tight end. It just, personally, I think he should have went linebacker from the get, because I think he would have been a hell of a linebacker, but that's just me. Regardless, this is a big win for Rutgers because now you get to go out and use the tight ends position to either A, upgrade the coaching styles and development at that position group, or B, or just get the best of both worlds if you can find one of those guys out there, and have a really good recruiter like most programs do. They usually just throw the tight ends coach title on a really recruiting shark type guy, because honestly, if you think about it, the receiving aspect, you can get the wide receivers coach to help you out. From a blocking aspect, you can get the offensive line coach to help you out. You don't really need to do a whole lot. So it's an interesting scenario, and there's already a couple names I think we've thrown out there. So I don't know if you want to go over it or not, I guess.
Yeah, we can. I mean, just to kind of touch on a few things you said, the tight end position has kind of been a black hole under Schiano 2.0. I mean, it's been that way for a while, but if you look at all the guys they've brought in, they brought in Langan early on. He was actually here under Ash, but they converted him to a tight end. You landed Victor Konopka, you landed Mike Higgins, you landed Logan Blake. I know Logan Blake was a freshman last year, but they have literally gotten nothing out of those guys. Their backup tight end last year was a 6th-year FCS transfer in Sean Bowman, who I actually was pretty high on, but they didn't really use him. I think there's something to be said for Kirk not really utilizing tight ends historically, but when he has a good one, he uses them. Like when he had Brevin Spanford at Minnesota, he used them. So I think he's just kind of adapting to the talent he has. And let's be honest, we haven't developed tight ends good enough at Rutgers under Schiano 2.0. That's in some part due to the people who aren't here anymore, and in some part due to Andy Aurich. I know Aurich has been moved around on the line a lot, or moved around on the offensive staff a lot. But I think this works out best for everybody involved, like you said, because he gets to elevate his job title. Shiano has another feather in his cap where you can point to his coaching tree. You got another guy, a head coaching job. Will make every single position on the staff more valuable and more desirable because he can say, hey, I help my guys get to the next level. Our linebackers coach is the DC now. Our tight ends coach is now a head coach at one of the most prestigious FCS colleges in the country.
Yep.
But that being said, I personally wasn't happy with the tight end production. You had heard for a while that Aurich wasn't the best recruiter. Some stories about guys maybe even not even coming here because they were kind of turned off by the idea of being coached by Andy Aurich. I'm not going to say any names, but the names that you kind of put out there are pretty intriguing. Let's talk about some of the guys on your hot board and kind of where they stand in the coaching search.
Yeah, so intriguing is the right way to put it because apparently, according to our board, it's uninspiring. So I don't know really what you kind of expect for a tight ends coach, but I thought some of these names had a lot of appeal to them. I'm just going to start from the top. Steve Shimko makes a lot of sense for the fact that he was a quarterback at Rutgers. He has tight ends experience working as a tight ends coach at BC for 2 years. Before getting elevated to QB's coach, and then recently was the OC. So now he's got offensive coordinator experience to go along with Boston College, or with tight ends experience at Boston College. Also coached in the NFL with the Seahawks for a bit. Was a JUCO OC, coached at Georgia as a graduate assistant back in 2015. Obviously a different Georgia in 2015 than today, but still Georgia. Was a recruiting ops guy, and he's really developed some really good tight ends at Boston College. And Hunter Long, who had, I'm looking now, in 2020 had 57 receptions for 680 and 5 touchdowns. Trey Barry the next year had 21 for 362 and 2 touchdowns. And you could correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be wrong because I don't have the Rutgers stats in front of me. I think those would be the top, well, the one definitely, but second one might also be the top receiving tight end on Rutgers this past season. Either one, I guess.
They definitely would have been. I think Johnny Langan had less than 200 receiving yards, so yeah,
okay,
by default, both of them would have been. But Hunter Long, I want to point to him specifically because he was a guy who he elevated up to a 3rd round pick. So he left early, Hunter Long. So he was a 3rd round pick to the Dolphins in 21 after he had just a totally breakout season, the Golden Eagles. So that's something I think is super important to look at is how many, if you're going to hire a position coach from a different school, you want to see the pelts on the wall. You either want to see he's an ace recruiter, and tight ends coach can help coach or help recruit quarterbacks. They can help recruit wide receivers. They can help recruit other positions other than their own. Yeah. And I want to see that they've actually turned the guys in their rooms into either all conference level players or NFL level talent. Because let's be honest, you can have an all conference level player who's just undersized for the NFL. He's not going to make it. So if you have that production, you don't necessarily have to be an NFL prospect, because if you don't have the size, that's just not in the cards. But Hunter Long, he had a bit of both. He turned a guy who was, underperforming a little bit. I think he had 300 some yards the previous season in 2019 before he was elevated to the tight ends coach. Yeah. But that's stuff you want to see. You want to see development and you want to see production. And he's shown both those things at the tight end coach position.
Yeah, mind you, this kid was a 2-star. He's a nobody, honestly. He was a 5.4 2-star recruit out of high school from New Hampshire. Well, I shouldn't say New Hampshire. He was originally from New Hampshire, but went to Massachusetts Deerfield Academy, which is down the street for BC, and they took him really early over some weird offers like Connecticut, Fordham, Holy Cross, UMass, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. That's not screaming like sexy recruit at all by any means, and obviously he turned him into something. So he's definitely. I think Shimko makes a lot of sense, especially because it's Bill O'Brien just got the head coaching job today. He's probably going to bring in his own OC, I would assume, and his entire staff for the most part.
Or he might call his own plays too. He's done that in the past.
That too. So that would make a lot of sense from that standpoint. And I just can't see them retaining. I mean, I could see them retaining maybe 1 or 2 guys, but Shimko's not on that list of 1 or 2 guys. I'd say like a Saban Huggins potentially, but the rest of the staff is like meh. I don't know. It's nothing special, but. Moving on to the next one, and the next one's probably my favorite in the group, I think. It's Kent State co-OC / inside wide receivers / tight ends, because they had to give him every title just to convince him to leave South Florida, and that's Clay Patterson. He just got the job like at Kent State. I want to say 10 days ago, something like that. A little more than 10 days now, because I think it was January 27th. But he worked at under Shiraka for several years at Minnesota. He also technically was an assistant coach alongside Joe Harrisimiak, who was also, I think he was a safeties coach at the time before getting that co-DC spot too, at Minnesota. And he played another role in developing two very good tight ends, and Brevin Spann-Ford, who's projected as one of the top tight ends in the draft this year, and Co Kieft, who posted, what was it, in 2021, he posted PFF grades of 80 plus in both receiving and run blocking. He knows Kirk's offense. He knows how to coach blocking. He knows how to coach tight ends, obviously. And he's familiar with Harrisimiak as well. Plus, he also, I think he has head coaching experience too, doesn't he? He does somewhere. One of these Northeastern Oklahoma A&M. Slap another title on that one. Put Tech.
Yeah,
too,
that sounds like
around.
a school that you make up on your resume just to say you've been a head coach at some point.
Yeah, South Harmon Institute of Technology.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, he has Big Ten experience, so it all just makes a lot of sense. I think he just screams to me the perfect fit. That being said, he just literally just left for Kent State like 14 days ago or something like that. So you kind of have to convince him again, but it's a big jump up from. We've seen other schools do it too. Like look at the South Alabama head coach. He goes to be an OC at Bama. Now you go from co-OC to now a Power 5 level, Power 4 level tight ends coach. Honestly, I'll even give him some weird title too. You want inside wide receivers? Take him. You can coach Christian Dremel. So I like him a lot.
Who else you got on your list?
Tim Brewster. He's an interesting one. Now some might remember him as being in the news actually quite a bit this past season, as he was the tight ends coach for Colorado under Deion Sanders. He was the guy that they bumped off the field to make Pat Shurmur go on the field. Once he got that bump off the field, he was kind of a little bit of a diss. It's kind of like go fuck yourself, buddy. Like I'm done, I'm out. But he was with Deion for 2 years. He was at Jackson State for a year and then followed him to Colorado. He also just got hired at a new spot this offseason. He's the associate head coach / tight ends coach at Charlotte for Biff Poggi. I forget how to pronounce that one. But this is where it gets interesting. Now, he's a New Jersey native from Phillipsburg. He's a Big Ten alum who played at Illinois. Also, he coached at Purdue, was the head coach of Minnesota for several years, so Big Ten coaching experience as well. And on top of it all, he's a hell of a recruiter. There's a reason he was on Deion's staff. In his past, just to name some random recruits that I've never heard of ever in my entire life before. Malik Henry, some guy that went to Florida State, 5-star quarterback. Vincent Young, some other weird quarterback, never heard of him. Dalvin Cook, this guy sounds like an average running back, mid. Well, now he is mid. Yeah, he was also a top 25 recruiter per Rivals just a couple years ago with Florida State. And he also helped produce the highest drafted tight end in NFL history, named Kyle Pitts. So, I mean, guy seems pretty good.
Yeah, he sounds all right.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you can recruit that way, I know it's an easier sell to sell like a Florida State to kids or a Florida or Texas, but I mean, he's still a hell of a recruiter. He was selling kids in Colorado somehow. I know Deion obviously helps with that, but he, Big Ten experience, New Jersey native, kind of checks a bunch of boxes, but again, just got hired somewhere else. An intriguing name. I have John McNulty on here because, third time's a charm. I don't know if it's going to work out, but he worked alongside Shiano and Kirk, has NFL ties, coached NFL tight ends, and also, not to mention, he was just with arguably the greatest coach in college football history, Nick Saban. And we know what happens in Saban's rehab. They always come out, for the most part, pretty much better, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So it fits the bill like almost perfectly. It's just the fact that he was such a bad OC his last tenure. Big Ten experience, obviously. Coordinator experience, obviously. Maybe not the best, but it's there. And worked alongside Kirk before, so it really makes sense there. Tim Salem from Pitt. I don't know if that makes sense. He's a good recruiter. He's very well known for recruiting and developing tight ends. He's had several NFL tight ends in his time at Pitt. Two of them, kind of funny. Matt Flanagan was a walk-on at Rutgers, and Nakia Griffin-Stewart was a scholarship guy at Rutgers. They both ended up transferring to Pitt. They both ended up in the NFL somehow. They weren't very good at
Wild.
Rutgers, and he found a way to develop them. He also landed several New Jersey guys in his tenure there. He was there for 9 years. Kenny Pickett, I don't know if you guys know that guy. Nick
Sounds
Patty,
familiar.
Nick Patty, a former brother of a TKR writer. Um, Phil Campbell, former Rutgers commit at one point, somehow flipped to Pitt, which I hate Ash. Um, Carter Warren, Owen Drexel, Jason Collier, and Maurice French, who I believe is in the NFL now, who also Rutgers I don't think ever offered, but from New Brunswick, which just again mind blowing. Um, and he also developed a 2021 freshman All American in Gavin Bartholomew. So got a lot of ties to the Big Ten, a lot of ties to the region. Coached at Ohio State, Purdue, Pitt. It all really makes sense there. Trying to think, who am I missing? I'm missing one. The Tim Salem, John McNulty. Oh, Bill Kenny. I mentioned him last podcast. He's the most intriguing one of the group for the sole fact that he didn't coach this past season whatsoever. He's a little bit older, but he's intriguing for the sole fact that he has Big Ten ties to Schiano ties from when they were at Penn State together. He was at Penn State from 88 to 1999, which is a hell of a, 88 to 2011. It's a hell of a run, and rotated between offensive line coach to tight ends coach to offensive tackles coach to recruiting coordinator. He did it all, and then wasn't retained by Bill O'Brien, who we just mentioned before. Went to Western Michigan, coached under coached under Fleck, wrong Rutgers guy. Coached under PJ Fleck and coached under Kirk Shiraka and Kirk Shiraka's offense, where he was the offensive tackles and tight ends coach. So again, another guy that knows Kirk, knows his system, knows how it works, knows Schiano, coached with Schiano at Penn State, which you don't really see too often. Also, there's something else. Oh, Massachusetts native. Now, he hasn't coached in the past season, so that's always an issue. But hey, you want to get a little bit closer to things, come back to the Northeast area. Hell, I'll tell you right now, you don't even have to go on the road anymore. I got this guy, Scott Vallone, killing it on the trail. So don't even worry about it. So it would make sense. I think I have two more names in Eddie Allen, who's Rutgers quality control coach, but that's the only one that I have in-house. I don't think it happens. And then Andrew DiRenzo is a former Rutgers offensive analyst who actually just left for Fordham last year, and he's their tight ends coach currently. DiRenzo is a very popular name in the New York area. His dad was Louis DiRenzo, who spent 28 years coaching New Rochelle High School and coached this guy named Ray Rice. Never heard of him either. Yeah, he seems like a good player. I don't know. Just the name just sounds like a running back, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a name I don't think's gonna happen. I think he needs a little more experience before making that jump from Fordham to Rutgers. But we've seen like stuff kind of like that happen before. Like look at Demir Shaw. He's arguably the best recruiter on the staff, and he went from Fordham, but he did go to player development first for a year before getting translated onto on the field role. So some interesting names. We'll see what happens. Nothing's close to happening, it seems like. Although they did start reaching out to people, I will say that. I know out of this list, at least one of them has had contacts with the staff and everything, and has talked about opportunities potentially opening up for him. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think if things track the same way that they previously did under Schiano, where the first time his initial staff had a lot of young, inexperienced coaches at the college level, and as he's replaced those individuals, he has replaced them with coaches that have a wealth of experience. Kirk Soraka, Dave Brock, Pat Flaherty, all those guys are multi-decade coaches at their specific positions, whether it be offensive coordinator, wide receiver coach, offensive line coach. If I had to place a bet, I would place a bet on Schiano trying to do the same thing here. So try and find a grizzled veteran tight ends coach, kind of leave the recruiting to the collective staff rather than try and find a shark. If I had to pick one of those guys, Tim Brewster is the guy who I would choose, the NJ native, who's currently at Charlotte. Now, it's easier said than done. He's a very popular name. But that would be my number one choice. We'll see if it actually happens. But stay
Yeah,
tuned because more news will come out of this in the near future, I'm sure. And like Richie said, there's not really an official timeline.
I missed
You made
one.
a face. What's going
Forgot
on?
one completely.
All right, let's hear it.
No, not breaking news or anything like that. I just forgot one completely. Bobby Bentley. I didn't even
Mm,
mention him. I kind of really like this one too. He's another guy that just got a job. He's now coaching a high school program, Battleground Academy, down in Tennessee. But Bobby Bentley, for those of you that don't know, was a UCF analyst in 2023. Before that, he was South Florida's wide receivers pass game coordinator, and South Florida's, and then South Carolina's tight ends coach. Why is he so notable? Because he's the stepfather of Chase Dodd. So I
mm,
mean, Dodd's on staff. It makes sense. He also coached alongside Mark Orphy at South Carolina, and he's the one that gave a recommendation to Shion. Or well, I shouldn't say recommendation. It's there's a weird thing that happened where he reached out to Orphy when Shiano had an opening on the DB spot and said, "Hey, would you be interested?" So it's a little there's all these coaching circles, and it's kind of how these things work. But he's also developed some pretty damn good players in general. Not even I'm not even going to just say just tight ends because during his time at South Florida, he had Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn Jr., both who had very good seasons for Colorado this past season. One of them was the leading receiver for Colorado this season. And in his 2 years at South Carolina, he developed Kyle Markway, who had 350 yards, and then Nick Muse, who had 430 yards the year after. So both of them have spent time in the NFL. Muse is actually, I think, on the Vikings still. He was a seventh round pick. So, I mean, again, talent developer, knows the area well. Former Burns High School head coach, which if you guys remember when Dodd came, that was a big
oh
program.
yeah,
I don't know if it's still a big program or not, but
yeah.
he
That was
spent like 11 years there, something like that. So
mhm. Yeah. They had a ton of top-rated talent out of there. They had that kid Lattimore, the running back, who
oh
had
yeah,
that
Marshawn
devastating
Lattimore.
knee injury. Yeah, Marshawn Lattimore.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
so
right.
produced a ton of talent. So he's clearly he's seems like he's a good recruiter and great developer of players. So he'd be another good landing spot here at Rutgers.
They
We got
they
a
are
lot of
still producing too, by the way. They have two Power Five kids right now in the 2025 class. So hear me
mhm.
out.
And I do want to point this out as well. It's not like Andy Aurich was getting paid, pennies. He was getting
Yeah.
paid the 30th most in college football at the tight end position for coaching. And you have to put a caveat on that because a lot of these tight end coaches also have other responsibilities, whether that be the ones ahead of him at least, were either offensive coordinator slash tight ends coach,
Hmm.
or tight ends coach slash inside receivers coach, or tight ends coach slash offensive tackles coach. There's a lot of like weird permutations you could have, but he was a pure tight ends coach. He was getting paid the 30th highest amount, and he was scheduled to make 350 this year. He made 300 in 2023. So we have the money to go get a,
Pretty
a
damn
big
good.
name if we wanted to, and we chose to do that. So the
I think
money's there, and I do think Shiano will have a lot of coaches' ears on this one.
yeah, sorry about that. Actually, one of the names on the list that was ahead of him was also on our list, and that's Tim Brewster, who made
Yep.
400K last year. I'm assuming Charlotte's probably paying him less than that, but that's just a
Hmm.
guess. But he's associate head coach too, so I mean that's
Yep.
it's a pretty nice title. So and you probably don't have to do as much. Also, you don't have to worry about Deion Sanders, who's a little crazy on social media at times.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
also, also Drew
But more to
Manager's on
come
that
on
list.
this.
Gross.
Yeah. We don't really have much more regarding the tight end coach. We will have more as the days and weeks ahead of us come.
Yep.
But I want to talk a little Schadenfreude. We got Syracuse, seemingly,
Ooh.
the shining light on the hill for the last few months, getting a ton of
Hmm.
press, getting a lot of recruits. But you're hearing from a few people who, were in the know or would be in the know that things aren't quite as rosy as they might seem. Tell us what you're hearing is going on at Syracuse.
Yeah, so obviously first time head coach, there's gonna be some issues, and I just didn't know if I expect him to go this quickly, but it just sounds like there's like a lot of guys are just all fighting for power, and when you're in the head coaching position, it's really hard to manage everything. So it sounds like he's not micromanaging; he's extremely micromanaging everything, to the point where everything little tiny tidbit has to go through him. And sometimes that works for coaches, especially veteran coaches who are like long time tenured coaches, guys that have been around the game for what 40, 50 years. And when it comes to the new age of coaches, you're probably gonna piss off a lot of them. Back
Oh
in the
yeah.
day, I shouldn't even say back in the day because I'm only 30, but um, back in the original football days, like you were able to yell at kids, you're able to do this, you're able to yell at coaches, and you're the head guy, you're the man in charge. It's not like that anymore. You have to kind of because there's nothing stopping a guy from just saying screw you, dude. Like I'm out. Like I'll go over here and just be like an off the field analyst for a year, and I'll get picked up by someone else next year. So there's so many options too. So it definitely just sounds like there's a lot of turmoil going on within Syracuse coaching staff and every department within the football program, I should say, not just the coaching staff, but they've already lost two recruiters from the recruiting department recently, guys that have just joined within like the past couple months. So it's not a good look at the moment. We'll see if it ends up being anything. It could be a whole lot of nothing, could be something. But when you're losing coaches that have signed on with you like after a month or two and they're leaving to go somewhere else already, that's probably not a good sign. So see what happens.
Yeah, it sounds like Fran is trying to just do the Greg Schiano impression, and
Hmm.
if that's not who
It
you
works
are,
for
it's
Greg.
really, I mean, it works for Greg because I feel
Hmm.
like that's authentically who he is. Now,
Yeah.
if you think this is how I have to be a head coach, and obviously he worked under Kirby Smart for 2 years, he worked under Greg for a handful of years, he worked under Matt Rule, he's worked under a lot of good head coaches. So that's not to say, he's basing everything off of Greg, but I know that Greg kind of took him under his wing and really started to groom him as a
Hmm.
potential head coach down the line. So I do think that he learned a lot from Greg, and if that's just not who you are and you're trying to impose that on people,
Hmm.
it's just not going to go well. And I'm not saying that's what's happening because if you are a good recruiter, you're typically pretty authentically yourself. So I don't know. I'm taking some joy in hearing all the bad news that you've been kind of talking about between us off the pod, because I think they were just getting a little too, they're getting a little too chirpy on Twitter and on message boards about, how
Yeah.
they're back and Rutgers is gonna, get passed by Syracuse and just like talking a lot of crap when they haven't really done anything recently, and not like we've been, a great program for the last decade either. But Syracuse definitely thought that they were back because they were recruiting well, because they landed some high profile coaches, they landed some high profile transfers. But we've seen how that falls apart. We've seen what happened with Miami, arguably a better situation, better
Yeah.
coach, more money. They can't
Hmm.
figure out how to get it done on the field. Texas A&M, same thing. So just bringing in a ton of transfers and landing a ton of high profile recruits, if your culture's not there, if the guys aren't there to work, you're not really going to do a whole lot. So we'll see how things go. But I'm loving hearing all this bad news coming out of Syracuse, New York.
Yeah. I know everyone gets mad that Shiano's like chop, 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 but like that's literally his culture. Like the culture actually
Mm.
works, and you need to build it up. Now that being said, I don't know if it's going to really affect them recruiting wise because like little stuff like that probably won't hurt too much. Where you're losing like a couple of recruiting staffers, but we'll see. Who knows? It's gonna be interesting to see what they do this season and the rest of this off season too.
Definitely. Let's switch over to some hoops. So, as we kind of alluded to at the beginning of the show, Rutgers has a big time matchup tomorrow afternoon against Wisconsin, who's reeling. They've lost three in a row. They
Hmm.
started 16 and 4. They were in first place in the Big Ten. Now they're down to 16 and 8. They had
Yuck.
fallen, I think, to third or fourth in the Big Ten. This is still a really talented team, but they're reeling right now. Um, they've lost to Nebraska on the road in overtime. They lost at home to
Hmm.
Purdue, and most recently they lost on the road to Michigan on Wednesday night.
That's a bad one.
We both predicted them to win. Talk through a little bit of your reasoning as to why you think Rutgers pulls this one off tomorrow.
Between the slump that they're having, between the fact that it's a home game for Rutgers, between the
Mm-hmm.
fact Wisconsin's what would you say before 10 days in 4 games, 4 games in ten
Yeah, so
days.
this will be their fourth game in 10 days, and the third of which is on the road. So this will be
Yeah,
three road games in a 10-day period for them.
they're also struggling versus the bottom parts of the Big Ten, which is kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to Penn State earlier, or middle of last month. They lost to Nebraska, who's we saw them recently. Like I didn't think they were anything special.
Mm-hmm.
Tobinaga's great, but the rest of the team's like whatever. They lost to Purdue, obviously. I think we saw that one coming. But Michigan, I did not see them losing to Michigan. I know we
Yep.
talked about it on the pod earlier this week, saying like, hey, maybe like they put up a fight against Michigan, puts up a fight against them, and they're a little tired going into this one. But Michigan pretty much dogged them, and that's a
Yeah.
bad
Yep.
Michigan team, as we
Yep.
again as we know because we just saw it. Might have just saved Juwan Howard's job for the rest of this season, maybe. Maybe even next. Who knows? Maybe they give him another year. But yeah, I think it's just Rutgers' defense is phenomenal too. On top of it all, um, it's kind of opposite, whereas Wisconsin's offense is really good. So we'll see what's when push comes to shove. When push comes to shove, what happens? But being a little rack magic, I like to think Rutgers can pull this one off in front of a what is probably expected to be an insane crowd environment.
Yeah, it'll be loud in the rack. They finally, I think Rutgers fans collectively finally feel that things are going in the right direction from, what happened in the offseason between Cam and Paul and Bane Dongo and Jeremiah Williams being ruled ineligible for the first part of the season. It didn't feel like a whole lot was going in Rutgers' direction. But ever since Jeremiah came back, man, this team looks totally different. We're on a 2-game winning streak with him. Both of those games came on the road. Um, I do want to kind of point out how good Wisconsin is as a team. Like, this is not going to be an easy matchup for Rutgers. They have a ton of length. Um, you know, starting shooting guard for them, AJ Storr, 6'7", who's their leading scorer. Tyler Wall is 6'9". Stephen Crowell, 7 feet tall. Max Klesmit is 6'4". Chucky Hepburn's their smallest starter at 6'2", but uh, they're not going to be an easy team to beat by any means. They typically
No.
run a 3-guard starting lineup. Um, Collectively, they're a pretty good 3-point shooting team. They have 2 guys shooting over 40% from beyond the arc. Max Klesmit's their sniper. He's hitting 42% of his shots beyond the arc at a pretty high volume. I think he's taken almost 100 threes on the season. Um, some things that they're really good at, though: defensive rebounding. They're one of the top defensive rebounding teams in the country. They're one of the top free throw shooting teams in the country. And they're also one of the top offenses in terms of efficiency in the country as well. Some things they're not great at: they don't block many shots, they don't defend beyond the arc very well, and they play an incredibly slow tempo. They're one of the slowest Power 5 teams, or Power 6 teams, I guess, in basketball in the country in terms of pace. Um, so I do think that they're also pretty balanced as well. So they're ranked 14th overall in KenPom, and they're only one of 14 teams on KenPom's rankings that are in the top 35 in both adjusted offense and adjusted defense. So they are
Mm-hmm.
pretty good both on offense and defense. They're a better offensive team than defensive team. But this is going to be a game where we're going to need Jacob Young, or not Jacob Young, geez. We're going to need JaMychal Davis and Derek Simpson to really give nightmares to Chucky Hepburn. He's their primary ball handler. He's the guy who leads the team in assists by a large margin. He's averaging almost 4 assists a game. The next highest guy is Stephen Crowell at 2.3. Um, in general, I do think this is going to need to be a game that Rutgers needs to make ugly, and that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But given that Wisconsin's such a good defensive rebounding team, Rutgers is really going to need to, and this hasn't been their strength, but be really good in terms of their shot selection. So since they don't get many blocks either, you want to attack the rim. And we saw some glimpses of us improving in that the last 2 games, especially with Jeremiah Williams on the court. So I think you're really going to want to attack the interior on this one, either with Cliff or with Jeremiah Williams. Austin Williams is one of our better guards at attacking the rim. I know he didn't play last week. Have you gotten any update as to what his availability possibly will be for tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, so it's still to be determined for him. I was just reading a text actually. I got back. Yeah, to be determined for him. They're not sure what if he'll be able to go or not. It's kind of a day by day basis thing. So if you remember, he suffered an injury that caused them to miss all of last season with FIU, I think it was. I forget what
Yep,
team
it
it
was
was
at
with.
FIU.
Yeah, FIU. So I think it was ACL, or he was an ACL and Jeremiah was Achilles, or vice versa. I forget which
Yes,
one's
that's correct.
which.
Jeremiah had the
Okay.
Achilles.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's just more like similar to like why Mawat Mag keeps appearing on the availability reports. It's just the fact that they are sometimes you can't go. Like it's tough. You got to
Yep.
rebuild all that strength in your knee. So well, it's kind of a day by day thing. If you had to list him as an injured person, you would list him as a day to day thing, and then come game day, you figure out, hey, can you go? Can you not? He'll probably be questionable again on an injury report once again, or availability report, whatever you want to call it. But you'll probably know beforehand because if he's in sweats on the sidelines in warm-ups, that's
Yep.
there's your sign. He's not playing if that's
Yep.
the case. But we'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah, no, it'll be a tough game, but one that is certainly winnable for Rutgers, especially if the crowd shows up, which I 100% anticipate them to. Like we alluded to earlier in the week, it's going to be a beautiful day tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon. I think it's going to
Yep.
be in the high 50s, if not in the 60s. So perfect game, perfect weather, even though it's being played inside. But there's no reason, we've had a few games that were supposed to be big games this year. I think the Indiana game, we had a ice
Yep.
storm that night, so that caused a lot of attendance to be suppressed, but there's no excuse for tomorrow. It's going to be a perfect day. So get out there, be loud. And I do think that I think Rutgers pulls this one off. I predicted 68 to 62. I think you predicted a similar score.
I think I was 65, 62.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of game that can truly change the complexion of like where things stand moving forward. I think if we win tomorrow,
Ooh.
it'll be more likely than not that we're in the postseason of some kind. That's not saying NCAA
Yes.
tournament, but the NIT, since they changed their rules this past year, previously all conference, regular season conference winners automatically got bids to the NIT. So let's say, the team who won the, I don't know, let's just say whatever crappy conference it is, if they won the
MAAC.
regular season and they didn't win the conference tournament and they didn't make the NCAA tournament, they would automatically get a bid to the NIT. That is no longer a
Mm-hmm.
thing. So they're expecting a lot more bigger uh, conference schools to make the NIT moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So Rutgers, that bodes well for them. Uh, I would be surprised if Rutgers does beat Wisconsin and continues that momentum if they don't get a spot in the NIT. Which you think to yourself, the NIT is not really something I think is a big deal. And sure, it's certainly disappointing to only make the NIT after we've had so much success. We made it last year, obviously, but I think it's important to get some of these guys, especially the young players, pressure-filled, important games. Like every
Mm-hmm.
game is important in air quotes, but it's win and go home matchups like the Big Ten tournament and the NIT tournament that'll really kind of battle harden these guys moving into next year when we likely lose a Cliff, when we lose an Andre Hyatt.
Yep.
When we're now relying on, if he's still here, Matt, and I say if because you never really know in the offseason what's going to happen. Jeremiah Williams, etc., those kind of guys. So the more postseason experience you have, the better. It's never a bad thing to make the postseason. So that's kind of how I see it. I would really like to see them make a postseason tournament this year
Yeah. I'd be a little floored if they didn't make it after a win like this, if they get the win.
if they get it.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, you get this win too, momentum wise. You're going up against Northwestern at home on
Hmm.
next Thursday, and then Minnesota away, who's not that good. You could
Minnesota's been
they're
way better than I
they're
thought this year.
weird. Like they're not the worst team in the Big Ten like they usually are, but they're still like in the bottom tier. They have streaks where they go for what I'm looking now. They have a 4-game losing streak recently, and then they had a 3-game winning streak recently. So it's like maybe in 4-game because they're playing Iowa on Sunday, so they have a shot there. Um, yeah, so I mean, you can flip this thing completely, flip the script of Rutgers basketball, and it also gives you another Q1 win, which is nice. I know we can't look too far into the quadrant rankings because I don't want to jinx anything, knock on wood, but I mean, you never know. You never really know.
Yeah, for sure. I I don't even want to put the NCAA tournament in my mind, but
Yeah, I
things
threw it
are
out there.
things are at least moving in the right direction for probably maybe arguably the first time all season for Rutgers hoops. So excited to see it. Expect a loud, raucous crowd tomorrow. Is there anything else that you wanted to hit on before we head out today?
Couple things. I was watching the Waste Management Open. Chris Gotterup is in 37th place. He's one under. Former Rutgers guy, if some of you might remember. Still loves Rutgers. Still shows up to some events. I think he was at a basketball game this year or last year. I forget.
Yeah.
But he ended up transferring out. which I don't blame him for a senior year because you want to
And
go play somewhere that's
and he did go to the number one golf school in the country in
yeah.
Oklahoma for that last year, so I don't blame him.
I can't blame him one bit, but I think he's sitting at 1 under still. That's after round 1. I don't know what time he tees off today because it's all messed up because of the suspension yesterday and the delays and all that. But yeah, so I mean, you could probably look at him on ESPN Plus, I believe it's on. You can go check that out. Second thing, Super Bowls this weekend. A couple Rutgers guys in there. Logan Ryan, Sebastian Joseph Day, Isaiah Pacheco, who's going to win the MVP. I'm telling you, it's my prediction. He's going to win MVP. First running back since I said this wrong last week, and I'm probably going to say I don't know why. I keep thinking Terrell Willis.
Terrell Davis.
It's Terrell Davis. I don't know why I keep saying Willis for some reason. But he's going to be the first running back MVP of the Super Bowl since Terrell Davis. Mark it down. It's going to happen. It's almost impossible, probably, but you never know. They always it's here's a quarterback. And if it's not a quarterback, hey, let's give it to Mr. Swift. I'm sorry, not Swift, Mr. Kelsey.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't wait to watch her on my TV every time a big play happens. Oh, look, what's her reaction? Like, what the fuck? She's ruined football. I hate her.
Oh, come on. She was they showed
she
her
didn't
for
ruin
like
it.
27
It's just-
seconds
I
last
know,
game.
it's just
It gets
ridiculous.
overhyped.
I hate it though. Like it drives me nuts. And the Swifties are just ridiculous. Like
The NFL's loving it though. They've
Of
gotten
course
a
they
new
are.
market there. Every game is now
Mhm.
like I think I would be willing to bet that this happens most years, but this is going to be the most watched sporting event
oh, yeah.
probably in U.S. history. So
I wouldn't argue. But last but not least, Riot Squad has Super Bowl boxes. It's their fundraiser. So if you do want to get a Super Bowl box, I'll put the links down below. There's a $10 box. There's only a couple of those left. And then there's a good amount of the $50 boxes. I'll be honest, I'm in the $50 pool. So I need you guys to buy up the rest so we can get this pool going. But yeah, now if you are interested, you can contact Tyler Levy, who's one of the Riot Squad members, at 917-881-6889. I think I can put that out there, considering he put it out there. So, or message any of the Riot Squad social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I think it's RU_Riot Squad. And the links are maybe I won't post the links below. If you need the link, you can also reach out to me, and I'll forward you where to go and what to do and all that good stuff. But yeah, so if you need Super Bowl boxes, it's a good fundraiser for the Riot Squad. They travel to games. Saw about like 25 to 30 of them at the Maryland game recently. So it's always cool. It's always cool to help them and support Rutgers students. So you want to do that, I'll point you in the right direction. That's all I got.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go Chiefs. Just kidding.
Yeah. The last thing is we're still running the gnome contest.
Oh,
If
yeah,
you want to win the Rutgers gnome, you have to either leave a comment on this YouTube video, or you have to give us a review on your favorite podcasting app and include something about a gnome. We've been using Gnome Me as the comment you got to leave. But whatever, as long as it mentions a gnome, we're going to include you on the spin of the prize wheel.
Yeah.
That will be run, let's just say we'll run it next week at some point. So if you're listening to this, we'll run it on our last pod next week, whether that be Thursday or Friday. So
Got some more giveaways going forward. I'm going to give a little sneak peek here to what their next giveaway is going to be. Look at this bad boy.
oh, okay. Is that a
Kyle
Monangai card? Interesting.
Yeah. A Chrome
All right.
Bauman. Bauman's pretty good trading card company.
What's that number two?
Says his mom likes football more than he does. It's a little fun fact on the back. Look at that. I didn't know that.
Is that a numbered to a certain number card, or is
No,
that just
not this one.
Okay.
Yeah, just a normal trading card, but they're hard to find. It's a Topps trading card, Bauman Chrome. I mean, first edition. It's just cool to have Rutgers trading cards now. Like that's what it makes NIL cool. This type of stuff.
Yeah.
Anything else, it's like, oh, jeez.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the next giveaway. So don't worry about that one. Type "know me" if you want this guy up here.
All right. Well, thanks once again to everybody who's listening. We got a lot of reviews from the gnome contest, which I'm happy about, but also a little surprised by. So if you still want to get involved, you still can until next week. But for me and Richie, this has been another edition of the Night Report podcast. Signing off.